May 10th, 2011, 6:15 a.m. Naples, Italy. Feliciano Mallardo sits in a hidden bunker underneath an insurance office, drinking his third espresso of the morning. He doesn't know it yet, but 200 armed carabinieri officers are closing in on his location. In 90 minutes, they'll see 600 million euros in assets, 900 properties, 23 companies, and 200 bank accounts. His empire will vanish. But here's what makes Mallardo different from every other mob boss you heard about. He didn't build his fortune on drugs, guns, or prostitution. He built it on coffee. Plain, ordinary, everyday coffee. This isn't just another mobster story. This is about how the Mafia discovered that the most profitable racket in modern crime isn't dramatic or violent. It's invisible. It's a cup of espresso at your local cafe, a coffee machine in a corner bar, an import container at the port. From Naples to New York, from Sicily to Canada, organized crime families turned coffee into a $500 million empire that operated for decades without anyone noticing. No headlines, no FBI task forces, just billions of cups of coffee, and the Mafia taking a cut from every single one. But here's what makes this story fascinating. The coffee business wasn't about selling drugs disguised as beans. It was about controlling legitimate commerce, so completely that cafe owners had no choice but to pay. And the genius of it? The victims never reported it. Because how do you explain to police that the Mafia is forcing you to buy overpriced espresso? This is the story of how organized crime hijacked one of the world's most beloved beverages. From the Camorra clans of Naples, who controlled $800 million in coffee distribution, to the American crews who pioneered coffee extortion in Brooklyn cafes, to the Sicilian bosses who turned espresso into the perfect, untraceable income stream. This is about greed, control, and the invisible hand of the mob in your morning cup of coffee. The operation started where all great Mafia innovations begin, not in a dark alley or a blood-soaked restaurant, but in a quiet calculation of profit and risk. And it started decades before anyone realized what was happening. Giuseppe Morello understood something in 1910 that most criminals didn't. Legitimate business could be more profitable than crime. Morello, known as a clutch hand because of his deformed right hand, ran the first Italian organized crime family in New York. He operated counterfeiting rings, extortion rackets, and murder for hire. But he also owned a small import business on Prince Street in Manhattan. He brought in olive oil, wine, pasta, and coffee. Lots of coffee. Here's what made Morello brilliant. He realized that Italian immigrants would pay premium prices for authentic Italian products. They wanted the taste of home. And Morello controlled the supply chain. If you wanted to open an Italian cafe or restaurant in New York in 1910, you bought your coffee from Morello's import company. Not because he threatened you, because he was the only supplier who had connections in Sicily to get the real product. The profit margin was extraordinary. Buy green coffee beans in Sicily for 50 cents per pound. Ship them to New York for another 10 cents. Roast them. Sell them to cafes for $2 per pound. A 300% markup on a legal product. No risk of arrest. No violence required. Just control the supply. Control the market. But Morello's empire collapsed when he was convicted of counterfeiting in 1910. He spent 20 years in prison. When he got out in 1930, the landscape had changed. Prohibition was over. The big money in bootlegging was gone. And Morello, at 63 years old, went back to what he knew. Restaurants, import businesses. And he was murdered 4 months later by rivals who wanted his territory. For the next 50 years, the coffee business stayed small. Mafia families used cafes and social clubs as fronts, meeting places, headquarters. The Rave Night Social Club on 247 Mulberry Street in Little Italy. The Cafe Valentino on 18th Avenue in Bensonhurst, owned by John Gambino and his brothers. These weren't money makers. They were operational bases, places to conduct business away from surveillance. But in the 1980s, something changed. The Mafia's traditional revenue streams started drying up. Construction rackets faced federal oversight. Union control was eroding. Drug trafficking brought too much attention from law enforcement. The five families needed new income. and they looked at the coffee sitting on their own cafe tables. John Gambino saw it first. Born in Palermo, Sicily in 1940, Gambino immigrated to New York in 1966. He opened the Cafe Valentino in Bensonhurst with his brothers. It was a legitimate business. They served espresso, cappuccino, pastries. But Gambino noticed something. Every morning, 200 customers came through. Each bought coffee. At $2 per cup, that was $400 per day, $146,000 per year. From one small cafe. Gambino did the math. There were 3,000 Italian cafes and restaurants in New York City. If each one generated $146,000 annually from coffee sales, that was $438 million in total coffee revenue. And the Gambino family controlled the neighborhoods where most of those cafes operated. Here's where it gets interesting. Gambino didn't threaten cafe owners directly. He used the import model. He approached cafe owners with a simple pitch. Buy your coffee from our supplier. We'll give you better prices than the big commercial roasters. We'll deliver weekly. We'll provide espresso machines. All you have to do is use our brand. The cafe owners agreed, because the deal actually was better. Gambino's supplier, operating out of a warehouse in Brooklyn, sold coffee 20% cheaper than Lavazza or Illy. The machines were free, just pay for maintenance. It looked like a great business opportunity. But here's the trap. Once a cafe signed up with Gambino's supplier, they couldn't switch. If they tried to buy from another company, the espresso machines would mysteriously break, deliveries would stop, and a visit from someone connected would make it clear, stay with our coffee or there's a problem. The cafe owners were stuck. And here's the genius. They weren't paying obvious extortion. They were paying slightly inflated prices for coffee. Instead of $6 per pound, they paid $8 per pound, an extra $2 per pound. A cafe using 100 pounds of coffee per week paid an extra $200. That's $10,400 per year. Multiply that by 500 cafes in Gambino territory, and that's $5.2 million annually. Clean money, legitimate business income, impossible to prosecute. Gambino's operation ran from 1980 to 1990. It generated an estimated $30 million over that decade. But Gambino didn't get caught for coffee extortion. He got indicted for heroin trafficking in 1988. The FBI set up a fake Italian food import company as a sting operation. Gambino walked right into it, thinking he was expanding his legitimate business. He was convicted in 1992, sentenced to 10 years, and his coffee operation collapsed. But the model didn't die. It spread, because organized crime families talk to each other. And in Italy, the Camorra was watching very carefully. The Camorra is not the Sicilian Mafia. It's the Neapolitan version. Older, more fragmented, more violent. Instead of one hierarchy, the Camorra is 100 independent clans fighting for territory in and around Naples. They control everything. Drugs, weapons, garbage disposal, construction. And starting in the 1990s, coffee. The Mallardo clan controlled Giuliano and Campania, a town of 120,000 people north of Naples. The boss, Feliciano Mallardo, ran the clan with his brothers and cousins. They were involved in standard Camorra activities: extortion, drug trafficking, money laundering. But in 1995, Mallardo saw what the American crews were doing with coffee and realized something brilliant. Italy produced coffee culture. Naples was the espresso capital of Europe, and nobody was controlling the distribution. Mallardo's strategy was simple: control every step of the supply chain. He established import companies that brought green coffee beans from Brazil and Colombia. He bought roasting facilities that processed the beans. He created distribution companies that sold to cafes and bars. And he manufactured espresso machines. Everything a cafe needed to operate, Mallardo controlled. Here's how it worked. A cafe owner in Naples wanted to open a new location. They needed coffee, an espresso machine, and regular deliveries. A Mallardo company sales representative would visit. Very friendly, very professional. They'd offer a complete package: machine, coffee, delivery, maintenance, all for one low monthly payment. The cafe owner would sign the contract, and that's when the terms changed. The monthly payment would increase. The coffee quality would drop. The machine would break constantly, requiring expensive repairs. But the cafe couldn't cancel the contract, because a Mallardo representative would explain very politely that their cousin knew the local fire inspector, and it would be unfortunate if the cafe failed its safety inspection. This wasn't crude extortion. This was systematic control, disguised as business relationships. The cafe owner was paying legitimate invoices to registered companies. On paper, everything looked legal, but the prices were 40% higher than market rate, and the cafe had no choice. The Mallardo clan expanded aggressively. By 2005, they controlled coffee distribution to 2,000 cafes and restaurants across the Naples region. They also moved into related products: soft drinks, alcohol, pharmaceutical supplies, betting shops. If a business needed supplies, Mallardo companies provided them at inflated prices, with no option to refuse. The Italian police first noticed something was wrong in 2008. Financial investigators tracking Mallardo clan assets discovered something strange. The clan's legitimate businesses were generating massive profits. One coffee distribution company showed annual revenue of 80 million euros. That was more than Starbucks made in all of Italy. For one small regional distributor, the numbers didn't make sense. Prosecutors started investigating. They got court authorization to bug Mallardo's headquarters. And here's where criminals always make mistakes. They got comfortable. Feliciano Mallardo conducted business meetings in a bunker underneath an insurance office connected to his home. He thought it was secure. He talked freely, and the bugs captured everything. The recordings revealed the scope. Mallardo crews were forcing cafes to buy a specific coffee brand controlled by Feliciano's cousin. If a cafe refused, Mallardo's soldiers would visit at night and smash the espresso machine, or start a small fire in the storage room, or threaten the owner's family. The message was clear: buy our coffee or suffer consequences. Other Camorra clans ran similar operations. The Daltiero family controlled the Scampia neighborhood in Naples. They forced bars to buy minimum orders of 20,000 euros worth of coffee every 6 months. If a bar couldn't pay, the clan took ownership. Within 3 years, the Daltieros controlled 47 cafes and bars in Scampia. They weren't running a coffee business. They were seizing businesses through debt. The Valero clan in Portisai took a different approach. They targeted high-end restaurants and cafes in tourist areas. The pitch was protection. Pay us 5,000 euros per month, and we guarantee no problems. No break-ins. No vandalism. No health inspector issues. And as part of the package, you buy coffee from our supplier. The restaurant's paid. Because in Naples, Camorra protection is real. You either pay them or pay someone else. The coffee was just another layer of the racket. By 2010, prosecutors estimated the Camorra controlled 70% of coffee distribution in the Naples region. That represented approximately 800 million euros in annual revenue. Not all profit, obviously, but even a 10% profit margin on 800 million euros is 80 million euros per year. Split among several clans, that's still extraordinary money. Clean money, hard to trace, almost impossible to prosecute. Operation Cafe Macchiato changed everything. Italian prosecutors spent 2 years building their case. They documented payments, contracts, threats. They turned informants who explained the system from the inside. And on May 10, 2011, they struck. 200 Carabinieri officers raided 50 locations simultaneously. They arrested 7 members of the Mallardo clan, including Feliciano Mallardo. They seized 600 million euros in assets, 900 properties, 23 companies, 200 bank accounts. It was the largest financial seizure in Italian anti-mafia history. But here's what's important. They didn't charge the Mallardos with coffee extortion. They charged them with mafia association, money laundering, and enterprise corruption. The coffee business was evidence of mafia activity, but it wasn't the crime itself, because forcing someone to buy overpriced coffee isn't clearly illegal. It's just aggressive business practices. unless you can prove it's connected to a criminal organization. Interior Minister Roberto Moroni held a press conference. He called it an extraordinary operation and said seizing assets in the clans means hitting them in the heart and making them understand that crime doesn't pay. But the prosecution faced a problem. How do you prove extortion when the victims won't testify? Cafe owners refused to cooperate. They feared retaliation. Even with Mallardo in prison, his clan still operated. His brothers and cousins took over. And they made it known. Anyone who testified would face consequences. Several cafe owners who initially agreed to cooperate received warnings, graffiti on their storefronts, anonymous phone calls. One owner found his car vandalized with a note, "Keep your mouth shut." The case went to trial in 2014. The prosecution presented wiretap evidence, financial records, and testimony from law enforcement. But without victim testimony, the case was weaker. Feliciano Mallardo's defense argued that his companies were legitimate businesses operating in a competitive market. High prices reflected quality products and premium service. The defense portrayed him as a successful entrepreneur targeted because of his family name. The jury didn't buy it. Mallardo was convicted of Mafia association and sentenced to 15 years in prison. His assets remained seized. His companies were dissolved. But the model survived because dozens of other Camorra clans watched the trial and learned lessons. Be more careful with communications. Use more layers between the clan and the businesses. Make the prices look more competitive. Don't get greedy. Meanwhile, the coffee racket was spreading internationally, and it was evolving into something even more sophisticated. Antonio Nicasso is one of the world's leading mafia experts. He's a professor at Queen's University in Canada and has written 40 books on organized crime. In 2017, he told reporters something shocking. Coffee is the new racket. Mafia groups in the U.S. and Canada were the first to use espresso as an instrument for extortion by forcing cafe owners to buy specific brands of coffee imported from Italy. Here's what Nicasso discovered. Sicilian mafia members who immigrated to Canada in the 1980s and 1990s brought the coffee model with them. They opened import companies in Toronto and Montreal. They offered Italian cafes and restaurants authentic Sicilian coffee brands. Premium quality, competitive prices. The cafe owners were happy to buy. But the catch was the same. Once you started buying from the Sicilian importers, you couldn't stop. And the Sicilian connection gave them leverage. They could threaten cafe owners' families back in Italy. They could block import of other Italian products the cafes needed. Olive oil, cheese, wine, pasta. If you didn't buy the coffee, you lost access to everything else. The Canadian operation was more subtle than Naples. No violence, no explicit threats, just business pressure. And it worked. By the early 2000s, Sicilian-connected importers controlled an estimated 30% of the Italian coffee market in Canada. That's approximately $200 million in annual sales. The American version was even more creative. In New York, New Jersey, and Florida, Italian cafes face a different problem. Espresso machine maintenance. Commercial espresso machines cost $15,000 to $40,000. They require constant maintenance. Descaling, gasket replacement, pump servicing. If your machine breaks, you can't serve coffee. You lose money every hour it's down. Mafia-connected companies offered maintenance contracts. Pay $500 per month, and we'll keep your machine running. Guaranteed same-day service. Priority parts. The cafes signed up because downtime was expensive. But here's the trap. The maintenance company would recommend upgrades and necessary repairs that cost thousands of dollars. And if the cafe owner refused, the machine would mysteriously develop more problems. The maintenance technician would explain, regretfully, that without the recommended upgrades, he couldn't guarantee the machine wouldn't fail completely. The cafe owner would pay, because a broken espresso machine meant no business. And once you were paying inflated maintenance fees, the company would suggest switching to their preferred coffee brand, because that brand worked better with your machine. The cafe owner, already trapped in overpriced maintenance contracts, would agree. This model generated millions in revenue with almost zero risk. The maintenance companies were legitimate businesses. The technicians were trained professionals. The repairs were real, even if they were overpriced. How do you prove extortion when you're paying for actual services? Federal prosecutors struggle with this. The FBI investigated several suspected mafia-connected maintenance companies in the 2010s. They interviewed cafe owners who complained about being overcharged. But when it came time to testify, the owners backed out. They were afraid, not of violence necessarily, but of retaliation. The machine breaks. Deliveries stop. Word spreads in the Italian community that you cooperated with feds. Your business dies. The genius of the coffee racket is its subtlety. It doesn't look like traditional organized crime. There are no bodies, no drugs, no dramatic shootouts. Just cafe owners paying a little extra for coffee and machine maintenance. Prosecutors couldn't build RICO cases. Defense lawyers argued these were legitimate business disputes, not criminal conspiracies. But the money was real, and it kept flowing. Because coffee is recession-proof. Even in economic downturns, people buy coffee. The profit margins are high. The demand is constant. And in Italian neighborhoods from Brooklyn to Toronto to Melbourne, the Mafia had positioned itself as the invisible middleman, taking a cut from every transaction. Then in 2017, something unexpected happened that revealed just how deeply organized crime had infiltrated coffee culture. And it started with a woman trying to honor her dead father. Salvatore Toto. Rina died on November 17, 2017. He was 87 years old, serving 26 life sentences in an Italian prison. Rina was the boss of the Sicilian Mafia from 1982 to 1993. He was responsible for approximately 150 murders, including judges, prosecutors, politicians, and rival mobsters. He ordered the assassination of Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, Italy's two most prominent anti-mafia prosecutors. He was called the Beast because of his cruelty. He once had a 13-year-old boy kidnapped, strangled, and dissolved in acid because the boy's father had become an informant. Days after Rina's death, his daughter Concetta Rina launched an online espresso store. She called it Uncle Toto after her father's nickname. She sold espresso pods and coffee accessories. The branding featured stylized images of her father and phrases celebrating his legacy. She claimed she needed to raise money because police had seized the family's assets. The Italian media discovered the store within a week. The backlash was immediate. Families of Rina's victims denounced it as grotesque. Politicians called for criminal charges. Facebook removed the store's page. Concetta Rina shut down the operation. But Mafia experts like Antonio Nicasso saw something else in the story. Rina's daughter didn't choose coffee randomly. She chose it because the Rina family had connections to coffee businesses, and because coffee was how modern Mafia families launder money and generate a legitimate income. Here's what investigators discovered. During Rina's reign as boss, several of his associates operated coffee import and distribution companies in Sicily. These companies had contracts with cafes throughout Palermo and western Sicily. The companies appeared legitimate, but prosecutors suspected they were used to launder drug money and provide legal income to Mafia members. When Rina was arrested in 1993, after 23 years as a fugitive, police seized millions of dollars in assets, but they couldn't touch the coffee companies because on paper, they were legitimate businesses with real revenue, real employees, and real customers. The fact that they were owned by Mafia associates didn't automatically make them criminal enterprises. This is the fundamental problem with the coffee racket. It operates in a gray zone where criminal control overlaps with legitimate commerce. The businesses are real. The products are real. The transactions are legal. But the coercion underneath is invisible. Nicola Gratteri is one of Italy's most respected anti-mafia prosecutors. He's been investigating the Calabrian 'Ndrangheta for 30 years and lives under 24-hour police protection because of death threats. In 2017, he told The Guardian, "People might think it's just an espresso, but there are thousands of bars in Calabria. It would be as if the Mafia forced every fish and chip shop in London to buy their cod from the bosses." Gratteri explained the larger pattern. The Mafia isn't primarily a criminal organization anymore. It's an economic system. It controls legitimate businesses in construction, waste management, transportation, food service, and retail. Coffee is just one piece, but it's a significant piece because it's so ubiquitous and so profitable. Here's the math that makes coffee attractive to organized crime. Italy has approximately 150,000 bars and cafes. Each one serves an average of 200 espressos per day. That's 30 million espressos per day across Italy. At an average price of €1 per espresso, that's 30 million euros in daily revenue, 10.9 billion euros per year. If the Mafia controls just 10% of that market and takes a 2% cut through inflated supplier prices, that's 218 million euros annually. Clean, untraceable legal income. And the model works globally. The worldwide coffee market is worth $200 billion annually. Italian espresso culture has spread to every major city. Wherever there's an Italian community, there are Italian cafes. And wherever there are Italian cafes, there's potential for organized crime to insert itself into the supply chain. Australian authorities discovered this in 2019. Federal police investigating the Calabrian Ndrangheta in Melbourne found that several coffee import companies were connected to organized crime figures. The companies imported coffee from Italy and distributed it to cafes in Melbourne and Sydney. Financial analysis showed unusually high profit margins and suspicious cash transactions. But when investigators tried to build a case, they hit the same wall as prosecutors in Italy and the United States. Proving that legitimate coffee sales were actually criminal extortion required victim testimony, and victims wouldn't cooperate. The coffee racket persists because it's sustainable. It doesn't generate headlines. It doesn't provoke public outrage. Nobody cares that a cafe owner is paying an extra 50 cents per pound for coffee. It's a cost of doing business. But multiply that 50 cents across millions of transactions, and it becomes a criminal empire. The Mafia learned something that modern corporations already knew. The most profitable businesses aren't the dramatic ones. They're the boring ones. The everyday transactions that happen millions of times with tiny margins that add up to enormous sums. Coffee is perfect for this model. It's legal, socially acceptable, recession-proof, and universal. Today, the coffee racket continues. It's adapted, evolved, become more sophisticated. In 2021, Italian police arrested 31 people in the southern city of Potenza for running a mafia-controlled coffee operation inside the city courthouse. They operated a cafe that served judges, prosecutors, police, and court officials, and they used the location to gather intelligence, intimidate witnesses, and conduct mafia business. The irony was perfect. The Mafia was literally serving coffee to the people trying to destroy it. The Potenza case revealed how brazen these operations have become. The cafe was awarded its courthouse contract through a rigged bidding process. Mafia associates created fake companies to submit bids. The legitimate competitors were undercut or threatened. The contract was awarded to the Mafia front company, which then operated for 5 years before being discovered. During those 5 years, they grossed approximately 2 million euros from coffee sales, pastries, and catering for court events. A portion of that money went to imprisoned Mafia members' families. Another portion funded ongoing criminal activities, and the location gave them access to sensitive information about ongoing investigations. When police finally raided the cafe, they found evidence of everything. Financial records showing payments to imprisoned bosses. Wiretaps of Mafia meetings conducted in the cafe's back room. Testimony from employees who were forced to work there and hand over part of their wages to the clan. The 31 defendants faced charges, including Mafia association, extortion, and money laundering. But several defendants argued they were just employees serving coffee. They had no knowledge of criminal activity. The prosecution had to prove that the cafe itself was a criminal enterprise, not just a business that employed criminals. It's a difficult legal distinction. This is why the coffee racket works. The line between legitimate business and criminal enterprise is blurry. A cafe is a cafe. Coffee is coffee. The fact that Mafia members own it or control it doesn't automatically make every transaction criminal. And that ambiguity is exactly what organized crime exploits. The global coffee industry largely ignores this problem. Major companies like Starbucks, Lavazza, Illy, and Nestle focus on their own supply chains and quality control. They're not responsible for investigating whether independent cafes are being extorted. Trade associations and regulatory bodies don't have mechanisms to detect or prevent mafia infiltration. It's not their job. This creates a vacuum where organized crime operates freely. As long as the violence stays hidden, as long as the victims don't complain, as long as the money looks legitimate, nobody investigates. The coffee keeps flowing. The cafes keep paying. The mafia keeps profiting. But there's a larger truth underneath this story. The coffee racket isn't really about coffee. It's about power. It's about the mafia's ability to insert itself into any economic activity and extract value. Coffee just happens to be perfect for this because it's ubiquitous, profitable, and socially invisible. The same model works with other products. Olive oil, where the Italian mafia has been caught multiple times selling fake extra virgin olive oil made from cheap vegetable oil. Mozzarella cheese, where Camorra clans control dairy production in southern Italy. Fish markets, where Ndrangheta clans control wholesale distribution. Construction materials, where Sicilian mafia companies supply concrete and steel at inflated prices. The pattern is always the same. Control the supply. Make yourself essential. Inflate the prices. Use subtle coercion to prevent customers from switching. Operate through legitimate businesses that are difficult to distinguish from honest companies. Generate clean money that's hard to trace and almost impossible to prove is criminal. This is modern organized crime. Not the dramatic violence of The Godfather or Goodfellas, but the quiet, systematic extraction of wealth from everyday economic activities. And coffee is the perfect symbol of this evolution. Something ordinary, something everyone uses, something that seems too mundane to be connected to criminal empires. In 2023, a cafe owner in Naples gave an anonymous interview to Italian journalists. He explained his situation. His cafe had been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather opened it in 1952. His father ran it for 40 years. He took over in 2010. And 3 months after he took over, representatives from a local clan visited. They offered him a deal on coffee supplies. He accepted because the prices were good. Within a year, the prices had doubled. He tried to switch suppliers. His espresso machine was sabotaged. He complained to police. Nothing happened. He tried to sell the cafe. No buyers would touch it because word spread that it was connected. He was stuck, paying 12,000 euros per year more than he should for coffee. His profit margins disappeared. His family business was slowly dying. He couldn't walk away. He had a mortgage on the building. He had employees who depended on him. He had customers who'd been coming for 40 years. So he paid, every month, every year, knowing he was funding organized crime, powerless to stop it. That story repeats across Italy, across Europe, across anywhere Italian organized crime has established itself. Thousands of cafe owners trapped in the same situation, paying extortion disguised as business expenses, unable to report it, unable to escape it. The ultimate cost isn't just financial, it's cultural. Italian coffee culture is one of the great gifts Italy has given the world. The art of espresso, the social ritual of the cafe, the craftsmanship of the barista. But underneath that culture, in too many places, is a hidden hand of organized crime, taking a cut, exerting control, perverting something beautiful into something corrupt. And the mafia doesn't care, because to them, coffee is just another product, another income stream, another opportunity to extract wealth. The cultural significance, the social importance, the daily pleasure millions of people get from a good espresso, none of that matters. Only the profit matters. Prosecutors continue fighting this. In 2024, Italian authorities launched Operation Espresso Gold, targeting coffee-related mafia activities in Sicily and Calabria. They arrested 22 people and seized 15 companies. The investigation revealed that modern coffee rackets have evolved to include cryptocurrency money laundering, using coffee export revenues to justify large international transactions that are actually drug money. The criminals adapt. They use more sophisticated financial structures. They register companies in multiple countries. They create complex ownership chains that obscure who really controls the businesses. They hire lawyers and accountants who help them stay just inside the boundaries of legality. But the fundamental model hasn't changed. Control the supply. Control the distribution. Make yourself essential. Extract money. Use coercion when necessary, but keep it subtle. Operate in the gray zone between legitimate business and obvious crime. Law enforcement struggles to counter this because traditional investigative tools don't work well. You can't wiretap your way into understanding a coffee distribution network. You can't flip informants who aren't involved in obvious crimes. You can't seize assets that look like legitimate business revenue. You need victim cooperation, financial forensics, and years of patient investigation to build cases that might not even succeed in court. Meanwhile, every day, millions of people buy coffee. Most of it is completely legitimate. But some percentage, nobody knows exactly how much, involves money flowing to organized crime. A few cents per cup, a few euros per kilogram. Small amounts that aggregate into significant criminal revenue. The tragedy is that most victims don't even realize they're victims. The cafe owner paying slightly too much for coffee thinks it's just the cost of business in a competitive market. The customer buying espresso has no idea the cafe is being extorted. The whole system is designed to be invisible. This is what makes the coffee racket the perfect crime. It's hidden in plain sight. It's disguised as normal commercial activity. It generates reliable income with minimal risk. And it's almost impossible to prosecute successfully. The Mafia understood something profound about modern economics. The best crimes aren't the spectacular ones. They're the boring ones. The everyday transactions that nobody notices. The tiny margins extracted from ordinary commerce. Coffee isn't dramatic, but it's everywhere. And everywhere it goes, there's an opportunity for organized crime to take a piece. Feliciano Mallardo sits in a maximum security prison in Sardinia, serving his 15-year sentence. His coffee empire is gone. His assets are seized. His companies are dissolved. But the model he perfected continues. Other clans learn from his mistakes. They're more careful, more subtle, more patient. And every morning, across Italy and around the world, millions of people walk into cafes and order espresso. Most of them never think about where the coffee comes from, who roasts it, who distributes it, who profits from it. They just want their morning caffeine. That's exactly what the Mafia is counting on. The invisibility, the mundane nature of the transaction, the fact that nobody looks closely at something as ordinary as coffee. But now you know. Now you understand that sometimes the most profitable criminal empires aren't built on violence and drama. They're built on ordinary products, systematic control, and the subtle exploitation of everyday commerce. The coffee racket generated $500 million, not through guns and intimidation, but through distribution contracts, supplier relationships, and economic coercion that most victims didn't even recognize as criminal. That's the real lesson of this story. Modern organized crime doesn't look like the movies. It looks like a business. A legitimate business, a coffee business. And that's what makes it so successful, so persistent, and so difficult to stop. The Mafia turned coffee into an empire nobody noticed. And somewhere right now, a cafe owner is signing a supplier contract, an espresso machine maintenance agreement, an import deal. And they don't realize they just agreed to fund organized crime, one cup at a time. If you found this investigation valuable, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden world of organized crime. Drop a comment. What legitimate business do you think the Mafia has infiltrated that nobody's talking about yet?